very, very interesting. I was wondering about the etymology of your name, Rogow, and of course, Faith is a beautiful name, and it makes sense in every language. It makes sense in every religion. But I took a peep at your LinkedIn profile, and what intrigued me that you have done a lot of should I say religious studies apart from journalism. You went into Jewish studies about the Jewish systems and mechanisms and everything else. So it'll be interesting to know you a little more.
Well, I'm looking forward to chatting with everyone.
It'll be great. So, Bhavna, do we have the students
Yes,
there?
our moderator is ready. So I request Harsh now to kindly proceed the session. And thank you so much, sir, for being with us. Though you are traveling, but still you just took the pain and you are here in Media Monitor. So today is the 18th session of Media Monitor. And with us is Dr. Faith Rogow from US, and she'll be talking about the media literacy, for early childhood. So how we have to make our kids media literate. So here comes the role and responsibility of the teachers and their parents. So they have to be media literate for making their kids, like a very sensitive kids and very responsible kids and media literate kids in this digital era.
Should I
So,
begin?
yes, Harsh, you may proceed now.
Yeah, thank you, Vajpayee, for joining us. Warm greetings to everyone who have joined us today on behalf of BAGMC Electronic Media, Department of Mass Communication of Prestige Institute of Management Research, Indore. I, Harsh Vijayavargiya, welcome you all in a discussion panel for Media Monitor, where we will discuss about the various aspects of media and its impact on individual and society. Today, we will be addressing the subject beyond screen time debates and protection, teaching media literacy in early childhood. We have Dr. Faith Rogow as a keynote speaker for the day, and our panelists, Professor Bhavna Pathak, Professor Zubair Khan, Mahak Jain, Trisha Nimbalkar, and Ashwin Matthew John. Before I proceed with the session, I would like to give a brief introduction about a keynote speaker, Dr. Faith Rogow. Dr. Faith Rogow has been a media literacy educator, advocate, and innovator for more than 3 decades. She is the co-author of The Teacher's Guide to Media Literacy, Critical Thinking in a Multimedia World, and Media Literacy in Every Classroom. She is also author of the forthcoming Media Literacy for Younger Children, Teaching Beyond the Screen Time Debate, which looks at how we lay the foundation for sophisticated media literacy inquiry starting in early childhood. She was the founding president of NAMLE, a founding editorial board member of the Journal for Media Literacy Education, a founding advisor to Project Look Sharp, and a co-author of NAMLE's seminal document Core Principle of Media Literacy Education in the US, published in 2007. In 1996, she started Insighters Educational Consulting to help people learn from media and one another. Her groundbreaking article, The ABCs of Media Literacy, has been widely circulated, and she has earned a reputation as one of the few people in the United States advocating for and creating media literacy education that is developmentally appropriate for early childhood. As a professional development specialist, she has taught thousands of teachers, students, administrators, childcare professionals, and parents to understand and harness the power of media. It's an honor to have you with us, ma'am. We welcome you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored that you've chosen to spend time with me. I'm going to share screen for a little bit. And,
Sure, ma'am. You can proceed. Yeah, ma'am.
Finish with that, and then we can chat, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So let me
definitely, ma'am. You can go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm assuming you can all see my screen.
Yeah, it's visible to us, ma'am. Yeah.
Very good. So I'll just point you to, I'm on Twitter a lot. If you want to reach me, my DMs are open, so you can see my Twitter handle there. And I'll just let you know that in terms of my own background in this, in addition to the biography, that I have academic training, but I've spent a lot of the last 30 years looking at how to translate academic work into practical, hands-on, on the ground, working with actual teachers and parents, and how we do this. So I'm going to kind of reflect that as I talk through the issues this today. I guess for you this evening, how to bridge that gap a little bit. So I start here in part because we have come through this year of COVID and the pandemic, and beginning to look at possibly hope for it changing. This is an image from the children's author and artist Mo Willems. And I wonder what children would say if we showed them this. And I wonder what they would create if we asked them what their experience of the last year has been like. And those two questions are the essence of what media literacy is with young children. Conversations with them about the media that they encounter, and providing opportunities to make media and to have them explain or talk about the opportunity to talk about the media that they're making. Everything else is kind of commentary. And it's clear when we're looking at doing media literacy. So when we say early childhood, we're looking at doing media literacy education, engaging with children who are aged, well, when they're verbal. So kind of starting at age 2, but mostly age 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the kids we're talking about. And for most of us who have been involved in media literacy education for very long, we're much more used to dealing with issues with older students, college students, secondary level students, right? Engaging these kinds. And it's very, very clear that the kinds of things that we do with them, we can't do with children who are as young as 3, 4, 5 years old. So what does it mean to say, well, we're going to do media literacy education with children who are that young? And my answer is going to be, we take a literacy approach, and allow me to outline what that means. Whoops, there's a slide missing. All right, I'll keep talking. So in education, we start with the end goal. And the end goal here is to create a filter that is a media literate filter. So we all have filters that we look through the world. And the truth is, we all have lenses and filters, right? We in communications theory, we would say something like, well, we all interpret the world through the lens of our own experience. Here's what that means when you begin to break it down to work with young children. We all have a shared lens, right? We all have a lens. If we didn't have some sort of shared lens, we wouldn't be able to communicate. So if I shake my head up and down, we all understand that means yes. Or if I do this, we all understand that means no. That's what we mean by we have a shared lens. And the more like other people that we are around us, we live in the same place, we share a religion, we have the same culture or the same background, right? The more of that lens is shared. On top of that lens, we all have filters, and those filters are unique to us. They include our own unique personalities, our own experiences, our cultural experiences that we may not share with everyone around us, right? And so what we're trying to do with media literacy education is to help children develop that filter so that it is, they're aware of it, they know what goes into it, and it becomes increasingly more sophisticated. What's important about this idea for working with young children, and I would argue actually with all media literate people, is that once you have the filter in place, you just look through it and it's automatic. And it's very much like literacy. Once you learn how to read words on a page, you can't look at that page and not see words. Your brain won't let you, right? The default of our brains is it wants to make meaning, right? All of our brains all the time want to make meaning. And so when we've learned a symbol system like print, we can't look at a print screen and not see those symbols, not interpret them automatically, not see them as words, not see words in strings as a sentence, right? Our brain does all that automatically. So what we're trying to get to when we say media literacy as literacy is, we want there to be that kind of automatic filter, but what we want the filter to include is a sense of wonder and curiosity and intellectual questioning, the ability to analyze. We want to create a kind of filter, a culture of inquiry as part of that filter. So and also ethics, right? We want them to be able to use media ethically as well as well. So that's what we're talking about and why the filter concept is so important to this. We want the skills that we teach as part of media literacy to become as automatic a part of the way that we look at the world as reading becomes, where we can't look at something and analytical questions don't automatically come to mind, right? That's what we want. We want them to automatically come to mind. When I work with parents, what I say is, what you want is to instill your voice in your child's head. So when they're looking at something that they know their parents wouldn't approve of, there's a little voice in their head that says, my mother would be really mad if she knew I was seeing this, right? Then you've won. You've instilled your values in them, and they're always looking at the world through those values, through that lens, through that filter. So that's what we're looking for. That has not been the history of what media and using media, and certainly media literacy with young children, has been. Instead, it's been much more like this, right? Instead, it's been, oh no, we must keep them away from screens. Screens are bad. Screens are going to ruin their brains. What do we do? It comes from a very natural instinct. We want to protect our children. That's not a bad instinct. That's a good thing, right? So the question is, how do we mesh this, right? How do we take this natural kind of protection mode that we go into and end up with culturally sophisticated filters that we provide our children with? Because what happens is, for those who take this kind of approach of this protection thing, the answer becomes, well, we better limit their screen time. So let me just talk about that for a second. It's really easy to find jarring statistics. In the United States, 65% of children start using their parents' devices before the age of 3. And by age 8, 71% have their own tablets. Now, that's not true for every family. It's not true for every culture or society, but it's a statistic. I'm sure you have your own frightening statistics for where you live, right? They're easy to provide. And when we start our examination from those statistics, that protection mode seems to kick in even more. And the question is, so how do we respond? And the way that we've responded mostly in early childhood is with a public health model. We look at media as a danger or a problem or a germ. And what do we do in a public health model with germs? We say, well, we have to create barriers. We want to keep ourselves away from them as much as possible, right? All of us have learned this lesson with COVID-19 and the pandemic, or previous pandemics like SARS, whatever. We understand this model. And my question as an educator is, why have we used this model when we are talking about media literacy for young children? Because the ultimate reality is, education can't ever be a game of keep away, right? In the same way that it would sound absurd to say, well, I'm going to expect children to become really print literate by keeping them away from books, right? That's as logical as saying, well, I'm going to make them media literate by keeping them away from media. So there has been kind of a recent stage to say, well, then what we want to do, we recognize that screen media can be a problem, digital media can be a problem for young children. So the National Association for the Education of Young Children in the United States and the Fred Rogers Center got together. They crafted a position statement in 2012. That's what you see on the left of the screen there. And the URL is there for it if you want to go check it out. And they said, well, it's okay to use it as long as the use is intentional. We don't just, plunk kids down in front of a screen and leave them there to their own devices. And so we want to shift from a debate over, well, should or shouldn't we use technology, digital technologies with young children, to What technologies do we use? When do we use them? How do we use them, and why? For me, that's a good first step, but it's still a stage that centers screens. And what we really want to do is decenter the screen and center our practice as literacy, right? So I call media literacy as literacy for the real world, because in the real world, if all you're doing is, as part of literacy, is teaching children to read and write print, the truth is they're not prepared in the way. Literacy used to be about giving people power, right? It gave you, when the world was dominated by print and our means of mass communication was print, right? Then the difference between able to read and write in print or not gave you power in the world over people who couldn't do that. Now, our digital world provides these digital commons that provide the place where we meet up with other people, workplace, school, politics, right? All of that. And this is a world where, yes, there's print. So I'm not talking about abandoning instruction of reading and writing print, but we also have images and sound and combined with the print, we're looking at a world that's converged. So in that world, just learning to read and write print isn't enough to make you literate anymore. And that's, I think, an important point. So one of the things that we want to think of is it's more than teaching children to become media literate. It's about helping children become literate in the media-rich world that they actually live in. And that's why I call it media literacy for the real world, where if literacy was once power, then media literacy right now is that same power in the digital world. That's what we're after. I summarized it kind of this way in a chapter that I wrote in the book, Technology and Digital Media in the Early Years, where media literacy education is about helping children develop the skills they need to become thinkers and makers in the multimedia environment that is their reality. So much of what we do is preparing children for the world that existed 100 years ago, right? When print was the dominant form of mass communication. That doesn't work anymore. We have to figure out a way to get beyond it. So here's the beginning of how we get beyond it. So we define the purpose of media literacy education as developing habits of inquiry and skills of expression. And for those who write lessons for young children, those become touchstones where every lesson is going to do one or both of those things. It's going to provide children with habits of inquiry or skills of expression. And for young children, that word habits is going to be very important, because when we're working with older students, when we ask questions, we expect accurate answers, right? Or at least thoughtful answers. And when you're working with a 3-year-old, sometimes that just doesn't work, right? They give all kinds of wild answers. They're thinking all kinds of things, but we still want to instill the habit of inquiry, that habit of asking questions and giving answers. So when we talk about habits of inquiry, we're talking about conversations, the speaking and listening, and being able to ask relevant analytical questions and find incredible answers. And young children can learn how to do that at their own level. And we also talk about skills of expression, which is making media, being able to effectively communicate using a range of available technologies and knowing things like how and when to share. So that's kind of what we're looking at so far. And when we define it as literacy, we also recognize that literacy is more than just individual skills. It's social practice, right? You can't make meaning in isolation. I can't show you a picture of a triangle and say that it's a circle, because there's a shared social meaning of what a circle looks like. So part of media literacy is using media to connect with others. The exact opposite of I'm going to keep you away from the bad media germ, right? It's the opposite. We use media to connect with others in ethical and beneficial ways. And so framing it as literacy helps. Here's another thing that I found helps a lot of people. It's distinguishing between media management and media literacy. Media management are the rules that responsible adults place around using media. You know, how much time, what you can watch at certain ages or what you can encounter on certain ages, right? Where you can use media and where you can't. Those kinds of rules that, especially for parents, we set up. And those are important. I don't want to dismiss media management as this is irrelevant to children's lives. But it's not media literacy, and it's not media literacy because it doesn't give children skills, right? So we want to do both of these things, and we want to understand what the differences are. If you have questions, feel free to, put them in the chat and we'll get to them in a minute. I'm going to run through some of this stuff and then we'll have a chance, I hope, to chat about some of this. So here's another question that helps me as I'm thinking about this practice with young children. What if all the digital devices we're using with toddlers today are obsolete by the time they reach middle school, which is actually, given things like AI and virtual reality and all those things, is possible, right? And the reason that I find this helpful is because there's another extreme to the, well, keep children away from media. And that is, well, media is going to be the answer to everything, right? We're going to be able to, they're going to become brilliant if we just connect them with the right apps to use and things like that. And that's not media literacy either, right? Just using media to learn content isn't going to be enough. What we're looking for is the answer to this question where we identify what are the evergreen skills they're going to need no matter what the technology is. Because the technology in our lifetimes is continuing to change. It may stabilize at some point, but right now we are still in major change mode. And so teaching somebody how to use a device now, like, for a while in elementary school, there was a big movement to teach children how to keyboard, right? Well, now we're moving to voice interface and touch screen. And so that skill is going to be less and less important, probably. So we really want to look at what these evergreen skills are. And it is clear to me that the most evergreen skill is going to be inquiry. This, instilling this sense of intellectual curiosity and wonder and valuing logic and reason and evidence. So let me just very quickly give you what that looks like in practice in early childhood, because for those of you who are really used to working, say, at the college level, some of it isn't self-evident. So one of the things that we need to do as adults is to ask more than we tell. When children ask us questions, especially as teachers, we're used to being kind of experts, especially for young children. And so our first response is to answer those questions. And what I would suggest is take a pause and instead of answering the question, ask a question instead. How could we find out? Right? Because what we want to do is begin to instill in children this notion that they can find their own answers. Now, this isn't going to be for everything. If a young child comes to you and says, well, I don't know, when is lunch, right? And you are the person who knows when lunch is, then they've actually done a good job of identifying an appropriate source of information. And if you ask something like, well, how could we find out? Then they're going to experience that as teasing or condescension or whatever, right? If you're the person who knows when lunch is and they ask when lunch is, then just tell them when lunch is. But here's another way to help build their kind of critical inquiry skills, which is, say, in a childcare setting or a school setting, to create a chart of the day and point them to the chart instead of answering. So then maybe if a child says, well, when is lunch? You could say, well, remember the chart? How could we find out? And then if they need help learning how to use the chart, show them how to use the chart. Right? So that hopefully next time they're not going to come to you and ask, they're going to find the information themselves. And that's what we want to get to. I mean, not only does it get them using charts, which are media, of course, and so knowing how to use charts, But here's what we're doing when we establish that habit, that pattern of just not going for the simple answer, is when they just go for the simple answer, what they're learning is, well, just let me find that trusted authority, and then anything that authority says, I'm going to believe. And that's what's happened with all this disinformation and fake news stuff, right? That's exactly the pattern that's going on there. And we're actively teaching it to most young children right now. And so what I want to do with media literacy is disrupt that pattern to say, now, this becomes a problem because the truth is, if you're working with 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds, you want them to trust you, and you are the authority, and that's appropriate, right? So we have this tension between wanting them to trust authority and also at the same time teaching them to look at things for themselves and come to their own answers. So we can start by, in part, doing this kind of response where when they ask us a question, helping them learn how to answer their own questions, and also things like explaining how we bring in media sources, why we bring in. It could be a guest in a classroom where instead of just introducing who the guest is, you say, and we've brought this guest in to talk to us about our musical performance because they are expert in this. Right? And here's what's expert about them. Just so we're modeling that we don't just choose anyone off the street, right? There are reasons that we choose, and here are the criteria that we use when we're choosing experts. Same thing when we choose a book, to take 30 seconds to explain, well, here's why I really like this book on this topic. Because this author really studied animals and the illustrations are really realistic and accurate, right? Just that much tells young children, well, there are criteria that we use. So that's kind of what we're looking for. And then we teach them specific questions to ask. We start with the young years, modeling them. And then we begin to expect that they'll learn to ask the questions for themselves. These are specific media literacy questions that are written for early childhood. Some of them would be familiar to you probably in your own practice. So instead of, we just use developmentally appropriate language. So instead of asking, well, what's the purpose of this? Who made this and why? We ask, who's telling this story? That's something a young child can understand. Or instead of what is this purpose? What does this want me to do? Makes it concrete so a young child can answer it. Also notice that the questions are in categories, right? That's actually important because in early childhood and actually in much of teaching, what become media literacy questions don't sound like media literacy questions. A media literacy question for a young child might end up, if you're talking about evaluating content or stereotypes or ethics, might be something like, well, would your sister think that was funny? Right? That's a media literacy question if what you're looking at are, say, media that kids are creating, right? So we want to look for these questions, and we want to develop the habit of asking for evidence. So we follow up with, how do you know? Tell me more, right? Why are you saying that? Not in an accusatory tone. This is why we start you'll see the page starts with, I wonder, right? So it's not an accusatory tone. It's, this is an adventure. This is inquiry. And we want to develop that as a fun thing, an important thing to do. So we model these questions, and we develop this habit of asking for evidence. So for instance, when we do a read aloud, we often hold the book up when we ask for a prediction. So what do you think is going to happen next? Or we look at the cover and say, well, what do you think this book is about? And instead of just taking an answer and then moving on and saying, oh, okay, let's find out, we actually pause to ask that child, well, what makes you say that, right? What about this cover makes you think the book is about, and it doesn't take, literally, it doesn't take more than 30 seconds. So this isn't an invitation to kind of lecture about, it's patterning this, modeling this inquiry exchange is what we're looking for, because it's so easy for those of us who are teachers to think, well, we have the information and it's our job to teach you that information, and that ends up as teaching you what to think instead of how to think. And media literacy is all about teaching you how to think. So we want to shift our language from conveying, well, here's what the message is, to skill building. We want to shift our language from telling children what to think to asking, that they ask and we ask. So let me give you one practical example for how to do that comes up a lot working with young children, and it's nutrition lessons, and especially warning them away from food that's bad for them. So the old version is, my job is to tell you what to think, right? To tell you that, well, television isn't really telling you the truth, or avoid eating these products, or the message of this is. So here's, one typical study of the top 5 most sugary cereals, avoid them, right? That's problematic for a variety of ways. Not only doesn't it build skills, but it also might be telling children not to like the things they like the most. And we can't have media literacy education being about telling children not to like what they like, right? It won't work, right? So what do we do instead? Because we still have the responsibility to say, you need to understand that these cereals are like candy and they're not so good for you, right? So what do we do instead? We teach them to look for clues. So we can teach them certain words or phrases. So words like frosted. Well, that's a good clue that there's a lot of sugar in the cereal. In fact, we found that Project Look Sharp did a study, found that anything with sparkles on the box probably has a lot of sugar in it. Right. And then we teach kids the actual facts about sugar. So it's not that we never teach content where we're the expert, we have information we want to convey. We talk about sugar and what sugar does to the body and how much sugar is okay to have, and, those kinds of things. But we teach children to look for clues on these packages. If it has marshmallows in it, we can look at phrases like made with. If it's made with whole grains, well, that doesn't mean it is whole grain, right? Things like that. We can talk about the package is talking to you. What's it saying, right? Is it wearing a disguise? Is the fruit that's on the box actually what's inside the box, or is that a disguise that it's wearing? So we can take these clues, but always looking for those clues. The word artificial, even before kids can read, we can help them learn to look for the first few letters in important words that we want them to be able to recognize, or we can teach them to ask. So just if they know that it's an important question, they can ask whoever the grown-up is, well, does it say words like natural or artificially flavored or made with? Because they've learned those are important clues if what they want to do is find a healthier alternative, right? So that's what we're talking about when we talk about making this about inquiry and skill building and a literacy skill, right? A decoding skill, instead of just telling kids about content. Or here's another one that's typical, where we might take a thing that we know is stereotyped. So the stereotype that all of Africa is somehow one big jungle, right? And instead of making that into a lecture about, well, that's not really what all of Africa looks like, we ask, is this a good source of information about Africa? Why or why not, right? Young children can begin to analyze that question. So we can even do it while they're playing games. Teach them to look at reading a game's values by saying, well, what do you score points for, right? That's a value thing of analyzing a game that a 5-year-old can do, right? And then they can even, once they've played the game some and are familiar, you can say, well, did the villains look like me? Or did the heroes look like me? Or can I create the avatar that I want to create, or am I limited in the avatar? And that can go to even real toys, like the pre-made figures in Legos, right? Do those look like me or not? Or can I make them look like me, right? We can even take very sophisticated media literacy concepts, or at least sophisticated for a 5-year-old, like all media are constructed, right? And here's how we can explain them. People make media, they make choices about what to include and leave out, and those choices shape what the audience thinks or what people think, right? But the even better way to do it with young children is to give them hands-on opportunities. So not just making media, but making media in a situation where they have to make decisions and justify their decisions, right? Where they have to do some planning and they get the sense of, yeah, I have to make a choice about this frame and what's going to be inside the frame and what's going to be outside the frame. And they learn the concept of inside outside pretty early on. So even very young children can make those decisions. So even if they don't have the fine motor skills to, say, manipulate the camera, you can manipulate the camera, but have them make the choice, right? Okay, that's where it goes, right? Yeah, let's do that, right? And if they can make it, I won't say fully in groups. You know, young children do they do individual play, then side-by-side play, and then they can do some kind of one-on-one play with a small group and then a bigger group. So this is a developmental progression that we want to be careful of. You're not going to do a group project with 3-year-olds. You might be able to with 6 or 7-year-olds. But even with 3-year-olds, you can do media making where they're making decisions, and that's going to be what's important for them. Or you can talk with them even if you don't have the technology available. So all children draw or paint or whatever they have available to them. And you can talk with them. I mean, paper makes a natural frame. You can talk with them, use that language of media construction of this is a frame, right? What's inside the frame, what's outside the frame. So you can pretend with them to jump into the frame. If I was in there with you, you know, what would I hear? If I look to the left or the right, they won't know left or right yet. If I look this way or that way, right, what would I see, right? And then as they begin to understand that, so you ask a question like, well, what would I hear? And then you ask the follow-up, well, how would I know that somebody was going to hear that? So if they say, well, you would hear a barking dog, right? Then you would say, wow, I don't see a dog in your picture. That's really interesting. And then maybe they'll go back and they'll put a dog in the picture because it's important to them to understand, you know, for people to know they're beginning to see themselves as communicators. And it's important for them to know that people are understanding and they want people to know there's a dog in the neighborhood, right? That's making that sound. The details that they include, you know, how would know if they're showing something that's their own thing? How would people know it's yours and not somebody else's? How would people know that's you and not somebody else? Oh, well, I'm wearing my favorite jacket, you know, or hat or whatever it is, things like that. Then they can begin to become better communicators just by us having this conversation with them. So we want them to see what they're doing is media making, even if it's not with technology. So I have questions I can pose to you all, but I think instead this would be a good time to pause for questions, and I'm going to stop sharing and maybe we can chat a little bit. So questions,
surely, ma'am.
comments.
Yeah, you answered most of our questions in the PPT itself. That shows how helpful the PPT turned out for us. But yeah, I would like panelists to step in and take the session forward.
Ma'am, since you have told that media literacy is not about like telling kids not to make use of media, but instead promoting them to use media in order to be media literate. So what is the role of parents in such kind of situation?
So this goes back to what I was talking about in terms of distinguishing between media management and media literacy. And we have to do both. So especially for parents, I think this is a little bit of a different answer. So you are going to make rules as a parent about what kinds of technology you think it's okay for children to use and when, and you are going to be the gatekeeper for content, right? That they don't just get to watch any YouTube video that they want, or they don't get to play with any app that they want, that you're going to control that some, and that you know, bedtime is bedtime and they don't get to keep playing at bedtime even if they want to, you know. So parents are still going to make the rules they've always made about anything that's appealing for children, right? I mean, if they're playing some other game and it's bedtime, we still enforce the rules of, no, it's bedtime and you're going to make this transition to bedtime. So parents definitely are still going to make rules about media use, and that is completely appropriate and actually important, right? Where we don't want to go with it is for parents to get this guilt-tripped idea that is not based in the research and what the research says, to say, somehow my child will be better off if I keep them away from media altogether, if I keep them away from screens altogether, that will be better for their brains. And then what we want to do is when they're engaged, to begin to show them some of the ways that they can begin to think about what it is they're using and what they're seeing and things like that. Does that help answer your question a little bit?
Yes, ma'am. And ma'am, even it is said that a healthy relationship between a parent and a child, is it necessary for children to be media literate? A healthy and an open relationship.
I think that it is for, I think, a couple of reasons. I think it's important to be media literate and to begin for the same reason that we think it's important for children to be print literate. We know that these are skills that they're going to need as they grow up in order to succeed. I think the other reason is because so much of media is image-based that children can begin to take it in at very young ages. That doesn't mean they have the world experience to be able to process what they're seeing and what they'll do, because remember, the brain always defaults to making meaning. So they're going to take whatever their own understanding is of the world and they're going to try to make sense of what they're seeing. And parents especially, teachers too, but parents especially, have a very important role to play to help children work through what they're seeing and understand it more. And to say, here's where, for instance, I mean, this is going to sound totally non-intuitive, but having a concept like target audience and understanding that we make certain kinds of media for certain people, and young children can learn that by saying, well, I'm going to make 2 cards and one is going to be for my friend and one is going to be for my grandparent, an elder, right? That those cards might look kind of different for that child, and that's because they have different target audiences, right? We put different things on them. So if they understand target audience, then, and a child sees, say, something that's meant for adults that we would have preferred that they not see, and instead of trying to explain it all to them, we just say, you know what? That's for a different target audience. It wasn't meant for you. You're not supposed to understand it. Don't take meaning away from it, right? It's just, it's not for you. Or another way we can do it, we're very used to setting rules as parents where certain kinds of things happen in one place that aren't allowed to happen in another. So there are certain things we're allowed to do at home that we're not allowed to do when we're a guest in somebody else's home, or things that we can do at school that we can't do at home. Or things that we can do, at least here, teachers very often use the phrase, use your inside voice instead of your outside voice. If you're talking too loud, right? That they get that there are things we do inside that we don't do outside and vice versa. So we can use the same thing for helping them sort through media worlds that they've seen. So instead of trying to explain to a 3-year-old the difference between real and fantasy, which they will never understand developmentally, it's like just they're not capable of it. But what they can understand is, well, media is a different place and it has rules that are different from our rules here. And here we do this and not that. And there they can do that, but we can't do that here. And just set it down as rules. So that's a long way of answering your question of, yes, children need to become media literate and parents need to become a little bit media literate and get comfortable with talking with their children about these things.
Yeah, I have one question, ma'am. As I observe here in India, because like earlier there were joint families, so grandparents were living with their, these small kids. But now because of the employment thing and other, basically the families are also becoming nuclear, and in nuclear family also, so both of the parents are working. So in that way, like mother and father hardly get time to interact with their kids. So like quality time they cannot spend with their kids. So it's quite challenging for parents basically to understand, or to to make their basically kids to understand how the media work and all. So in that scenario, how it is possible? Because if we talk about the other Western countries as well, I think nuclear families are replacing the traditional way of life. So in that way, how challenging it is to basically sensitize parents towards media literacy.
So I'm one of those folks who says we're all in this together, and that means everyone in the culture needs to be gaining these skills. And so all the adults in a child's life are going to have these skills and be able to engage them. Because we do have parents who are working, say, and who can't spend that kind of time with their children that they might like to, as much as they might like to. And in that case, we would hope that there will be other adults to step in and also be able to do those kinds of interactions that help develop media literacy skills for young children. That said, I want to also be upfront and acknowledge that one of the big differences between media literacy and print literacy is that when you say to somebody, well, it's important to say, read to your child, and that person knows how to read. You don't have to explain to them more like what to do. They know what that means. They know what it looks like. They know how to do it, right? That's not true of media literacy. Media literacy is still new enough, and the technologies are changing quickly enough that we don't have kind of universal, no adult who is living today anywhere got media literacy training when they were in school, right? When they were growing up. So we're in a gap, right? And all we can do is what we can do, which is to begin to fill the gap, so that if we start training ourselves and training children now, then the next generation, maybe there will be that kind of universal understanding, right? Maybe every adult will have that. It'll become a much more natural part of our world.
I'm talking about the relationship between children and their parents. So, ma'am, do you think that we need to make the parents aware about media literacy first so that their children can be better equipped in learning the same?
I do think that parents need help, need engagement in this. I don't think it can be first. It has to be at the same time, because whether parents want to or not, you can't keep your children away from digital media devices now. And even if in your own home, you're making the decision of, okay, we're not going to use that here, whatever the here, is, and whatever the device is, or whatever the media is. Here's what we know from research, that kids, unless you keep them entirely isolated and they never talk to anyone else, they're going to encounter it someplace else, right? It'll be with their friends at their friend's home, or at a relative's house, or a babysitter's house, or at school, or just out in the community, right? That they're going to encounter all of this stuff. So we have to do both. So we have to get this information out to parents, and we have to begin instilling the system. So wherever we get to interface with children in a formal way, right, then we have to make sure that their teachers and their childcare providers, their caregivers, know how to do this too. And so it's a big job for those of us who are involved and know some of this stuff about media. It's a big job, and it's why our work is so important right now.
Ma'am, in this digital era, how we can make children understand and aware about online harassment and cyberbullying?
Yeah, so this is one of those where in early childhood, we're hoping that they're not online in those ways that they're going to encounter that. So we're hoping, first of all, 3 and 4 year olds, even 5-year-olds shouldn't be online by themselves, or hardly at all, if that's possible, right? They're too young to understand the difference between the cyber world, or that things they do in the cyber world are going to last forever. As they begin to age up, so by age 6, 7, I don't know if it's popular there, but here kids are starting to play Minecraft at that age. And so they are going to begin to encounter other people in the world, and there are a few ways we begin to deal with it. So one is, if they've already had that grounding in, well, I'm a media creator and I have a responsibility to do this ethically, then they're going to kind of recognize, oh, that person's just not acting ethically, right? That this, we don't treat each other this way. They'll kind of know some of that. For the youngest children who kind of aren't understanding, we go back to that, well, media worlds are different than the other world. And yes, it's possible for that bullying to happen, but that's not the way we act, right? We say, you're not allowed to share that way online, right? Even if you would say that. And then there are ways that we can do explanations that are developmentally appropriate. So an organization called 18thMEDIA that does some of this training talks about, for instance, explaining to children and literally showing them, you can't put toothpaste back in the tube, right? So imagine yourself with a young child and a tube of toothpaste, and squirting out the toothpaste and letting them actually hands-on try to get the toothpaste back into the tube. And then we can help them extend that and understand it to, well, when you're posting things online, it's like the toothpaste. You can't ever put it back. And so we want to be really careful about the things that we say online. So this is all so new. And I want to kind of emphasize that too. You know, when we talk about teaching print literacy, we have a couple 100 years of experience in how you do that. And it took a lot of experimentation, and we still don't agree about all the best ways to do that. Most of this technology is barely 10 years old. And widespread access to it is less than 10 years old for a lot of them. So the fact that we don't have all the answers yet, that we're still experimenting with trying to find out these answers, shouldn't surprise us. We don't have all the answers yet, right? We're still working on it. So some people are going to we'll just prevent young children from ever going online. You know, a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old shouldn't be allowed to play Minecraft where somebody might say something nasty to them. Or we can say, yeah, it's like letting a child take any other risk, right? We could prevent children from ever learning to ride a bicycle, because you might fall and you might hurt yourself while you're learning to ride a bicycle, right? But we think learning to ride a bicycle does a lot of good things for a child. And so we teach them how to ride a bicycle, and we take that risk with them that, yeah, we understand you might skin your knee while you're learning to do this, or even when you're riding, right? Once you know how to do it. But we don't back away and say, well, I'm never going to let my child ride a bicycle. I look at online things the same way, and that we're going to have to experiment and figure out where the limits of our risk taking are. So, you know, while we're teaching a child to ride a bicycle, we don't let them out in the middle of the road with all the traffic, right? While they're just learning how to balance on a bicycle, right? We take them to someplace where they can ride safely and not hit anything and not be hit by other things, right? So those are the kinds of things. I think that's where we're at. There are some strategies we can do with young children. And for some children, we're going to say this particular child is not ready to do this now. And that's okay. That's a good call for a parent to make. Some children aren't going to be ready right now. Maybe they'll be ready in another year to take on this responsibility. That's always true of children for all kinds of things. It's not just media.
Ma'am, as we are progressively moving into the age of digitalization, so how do you see the importance of visual and digital literacy today?
So I'm a very big proponent of both digital and visual literacy, that learning how to read images is going to be really key. I do a whole other riff on just how we learn how to read images and how we begin to teach people how to read images. And I think one of the important things in early childhood is we have to avoid one of the patterns that often happens, which is we think it's important to teach children to learn how to read print, and it is. But in the process of doing that, what we tend to do is to devalue the images, right? If you look at books for very young children, they're filled with pictures. And then we move forward 5 years and all of a sudden there aren't so many pictures, right? And we say, we kind of leave this impression that, well, the important thing is to master the print reading. And so we stop talking about the pictures. Or even when we're working with young children, we talk about the message of the words, but we don't talk about the pictures. That's a mistake. We have to start talking. We have to treat the pictures as if they're as important information as the words are. And we have to not say, yeah, learning how to read print means you don't need the images anymore, as if the images are just scaffolding for babies, right? No, we have to look at the world that we're preparing them for, which is a converged world, and say both the information in the image and the information in the words is important. And the truth is, from research, we know that the information in the images is actually more impactful. It is more lasting. It has more of an effect. And so we do need people just to pay attention. And so I have this whole thing where I break things into competencies for young children. And one of the competencies is to attend. That is to pay attention to the media in their environment, right? Because if we're not paying attention to it, if we don't notice it, if we don't see it, we don't think about it. So we want to have people thinking about these images because they're so infused in everything that we do.
I had one question. I was just thinking about the paradigm shift. As you were telling that, I mean, earlier, I mean, most of the people, though still people just worry that media is not good for the teenagers, media is not good for the kids, and we have to protect. So right from protectionism theory, we can say we are moving towards like media literacy as a tool of empowerment. So do you think like it's a kind of paradigm shift? Like,
it is a paradigm shift for sure when we're looking at older children. I mean, for younger children, we still do have this thing of, but our job is to protect them, right? That a 3-year-old is not capable of looking at the world in the way that a 13-year-old looks at that. So I don't want to say there's no value to looking at this as protection. And I think sometimes the protection approach does help us ask good questions about the media in our own lives. And, you know, is this good, or should we be doing something about it? I mean, right now, people are beginning to look at how the algorithms affect what we see on our social media feeds, or how, you know, they look at, there's a big debate in the United States right now about proctoring software, because so many of the classes are via Zoom and things. And what if we need to give exams, but that the proctoring software has certain biases written into it where it doesn't recognize all faces equally. And that's a problem, right? So we want to keep asking those questions. And if protectionism kind of leads us to continuing to analyze the role that media are playing in our world, then that's a good thing. If it's just well, this is just bad, I liken it kind of to sex education in the United States. We can avoid talking with children about sex. It won't keep them from being exposed to it, right? They're going to want information and they're going to get it from somewhere. Better they should get it from us, right? People who care about them and love them and have their best interests at heart, than either to get it wrong on the playground, right, from their friends, or to get it from people who don't have their best interests at heart. That's where I think we're at with a lot of the media today.
Ma'am, how can we teach children about subliminal messages and satire used in daily media messages?
So this is an interesting point. There aren't actually subliminal messages. There are only messages we don't know how to read, right? If you don't know how to read and you look at a bunch of words on a paper, they don't make any sense to you. It's not that they're not there. They're there. You just don't know how to make sense of them. Same thing with images, right? It's not that there's lots of information kind of hidden in there. No, there's just information that we don't notice or we don't see or we don't know how to make meaning of. So my answer to that is really simple. That's why we make people media literate, right? Once you're literate, then your brain begins to make sense of what's there and notice what's there. And the better reader you become, the more you take in. So.
It's almost like 7:35 p.m. here in India, and it's almost like 1 hour, more than an hour. So now I request Harsh to kindly, sum up the session. It has been like more than 1 hour, and it was a fantabulous session. So Harsh.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you,
yeah.
Harsh.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. Especially the PPT that you presented in the beginning. I believe all the participants that have joined us today, they would have learned a lot about not only media literacy, but how we can engage with children, how important is visual literacy, how we can make it interesting for them, and how even how we can like interact with them. So yeah, definitely, as Bhavana ma'am said, it was a wonderful session, and thank you so much, ma'am. Really, it was a really enlightening session for us. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Stay healthy, everyone.
So on behalf of Prestige Institute of Management and Research Indore, this is basically BAGMC Electronic Media Department of Prestige, ma'am. So the aim of this media monitor is basically to talk on various aspects of media, and we do invite media professionals, media educators, and people who are working with the ground media, so people who are working with the community media. So it was a wonderful session. And I really want this session for my students because they are the future parents. So like the challenges which we are facing, I think, the situation is going to be more stiff, more challenging for them because their kid would be smarter than them. So they have to make practice of it from today itself, that yes, how to decode media messages and how they have to do the co-viewing with their kids as well, and tell them what to see and how to basically understand media in a better manner. So I'm really thankful to you for sharing your experience, sharing your views with us. And I'm really thankful to all participants who have joined. There are several participants who are from other universities as well. Some are the research scholars, some are professors, and our media students are as well. So I'm thankful to you, ma'am, and thankful to all participants. Thanks a lot.
You're very welcome. I just put my Twitter handle in the chat. If you want to reach me, you can reach me. If you have additional questions or comments, DM me on Twitter. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks
Thank
to
you so
all
much, ma'am, for your
Thank you
time.
so much, ma'am.
Thanks to all panelists as well. You did a wonderful job.